Is that better?
Yes.
Yay! Okay, fantastic. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. We are gathered at a time of heightened uncertainty and the possibility of mass deportation, weighed heavily on many families and educators who stand by them. Today, in any one of your classrooms, there's a student who can barely focus in class, worried that they'll come home to an empty house if enforcement actions take place. In many schools, administrators report parents hesitating to attend parent-teacher conferences, sporting events, or the school choir, worry that their presence could draw unwanted scrutiny. These are not isolated stories. They reflect the uncertainty and anxiety that many families and the educators who support them are feeling in this moment. Today, we gather to learn how we can respond in ways that uphold every child's right to learn and thrive, regardless of immigration status. We'll consider what the law says, discuss strategies to communicate compassionately without causing additional panic, and explore tools to ensure that students feel secure and supported. Whether you're a counselor, teacher, administrator, bus driver, coach, librarian, custodian, cafeteria worker, your work matters deeply. Together, we'll find ways to keep classrooms stable, reassure worried families, and stand firmly on the shared commitment to dignity, safety, and education for all. Let's go ahead and get in. Canvas sometimes likes to jump around and do other fun things for us. I'll also make the note, we've got some change of plans today. I am home with a little one with an incredibly high fever. So we've got some things going on in the background here, and I am home for this evening. So bear with me as we move through. Thank you to everyone who is here today and who has participated in making this come together. This whole time and resources came together incredibly quickly and would not have been possible without the support of our community members. A special thanks to CERC and its members, our on-the-ground educators, brave voices that you'll see appear in here as well. We are so glad you're here. On a note of housekeeping, self-preservation is part of this thank you. You are necessary and you are needed, and your presence with students is needed. So we want to make sure that you always are in a position to be able to do that. First and foremost, self-care. Number two, our district guidelines. Every district in every jurisdiction, no matter how seemingly immigrant friendly or not, has a line that can be crossed. Know what that line is. It's changing rapidly district to district. Make sure you know what you can say, what lines you can cross, and stay within those bounds. We'll share some best practices today, some hopeful ideals, those things that we would expect to see in the ideal case scenario. Again, being mindful that you will need to make sure of where that line is. It may be necessary to dedicate one person at your school, an administrator, a counselor who can safely share the correct information. And number three, of course, is legal advice. For many of us, very well intended, we hope to share and point folks in the right direction. If you, like me, are not a licensed immigration attorney, please do not put yourself in a position where you are offering legal advice. Nothing in this session today constitutes as legal advice, and sometimes even our best laid intentions can end up being harmful for the folks that we're trying to serve. So again, making sure that we are practicing self-preservation by dedicating time for self-care, knowing our line, and making sure that we are not providing legal guidance for anyone in our care. When we talk about the sheer numbers here, the word mass in this context, meaning a number that's hard to grasp and hard to quantify, is intentional, right? For those of us who are on one side of the fence that is designed to create a sense of fear and unease and anxiety. For those of us maybe on the other side of the line, that's designed to desensitize us from the humanness of it all. So anytime we're talking about designations and labels, whether that's refugee, asylum seeker, humanitarian, parolee, out of status, there's a human behind all of those numbers. So we will make sure in our moving through today that we are focusing on the human element of all of this. Another quick note is just laying context. Let's pause here for a moment. We'll start to understand the landscape and get into some of our speakers, knowing your rights and trauma-informed support. There were so many resources for this particular session that we've created a pop-up website dedicated to the tools and resources for this session today. So you can access that here. We can also drop that into the link for you. But all of the tools and resources are available from the bits and pieces we'll talk about today, and then some additional folks in your community, links, additional reading, and additional learning. So again, when we talk about the center, we want to tie into that human piece, and we want to make the additional note that while media tends to tether this idea of mass deportations and undocumented folks with Spanish speakers, I would like to point out that folks who are out of status, whether that's because they came to the United States and did not stop at a port of entry, whether they've come into the United States with a visa and have overstayed their visa or run into technical and legal hurdles on the way that have pushed them up to the deadline of that visa, whether they were perhaps an unaccompanied youth that's now aged out of protection. Undocumented folks come from every corner of the globe. So yes, our Spanish speakers are especially vulnerable at this particular time, but please keep in mind that when we talk about folks who are out of status, these individuals can be coming from all through the world. So as you're looking through your classroom or your space, be mindful also of those individuals who do not come from Spanish-speaking backgrounds as well. And I will say, if for those even who maybe have a different designation or who are already far along a legal pathway towards citizenship, the sort of rhetoric that's going on right now can create unease and tension for anybody along that path. So keeping all of our youth in mind as we move through. I usually would not pause to read aloud a piece, but I want to make it abundantly clear as we move forward that we are anchoring ourselves in constitutional principles. We have a founding guideline, we have tools and resources to support students, and we are anchoring those into the Constitution. Here we are today with the shared goal of ensuring that our students continue to serve as places of learning, safety, and trust for all students. Regardless of where we stand politically, we are united by our commitment to upholding the constitutional protections that guarantee every child's right to an education and every family's right to safety and due process. The Fourth Amendment and the principles affirmed in cases like Plyler v. Doe are not partisan. They are the legal and moral bedrocks that guide our work in schools. Today, we'll explore ways to honor these fundamental rights as we navigate uncertain times. I'd like to take a quick look, if you, like me, attended any of your teaching training programs a gazillion years ago, this will look familiar but may not be as fresh in our minds. We've got a couple folks with hands up. If that is something we can hold on, if it's a technical issue, go ahead and speak out. Okay, we'll keep moving forward. If there are technical issues, we'll go ahead and pause. Otherwise, we'll hold those until the end of the session today. We will have some time for Q&A in this as well. So first, of course, is that Plyler v. Doe. This is our guiding principles that say that every child has the right to attend school free and without discrimination or additional fees, and that includes counseling services and all of the other pieces that come along with school, right? So this legislation states that children cannot be turned away for any reason, including immigration status. Schools are safe places, and the non-negotiable in this is that schools must educate every child, ensuring stability and protection amid uncertainty. So what we'll do here is as we move through, is sort of cling to these principles. We'll also recognize that some of these are in a state of risk that we want to keep our eyes on. But this Plyler v. Doe is the first one that we will hold on to. The next one is the Fourth Amendment, which protects against reasonable searches and seizures. This is the piece you're probably hearing about a lot in the news lately. So what the Fourth Amendment says is that schools, hospitals, weddings, funerals, any places that are considered sensitive locations are typically off limits or have historically been off limits, that there should be a proper way to go about a search, and those are not the right places for them. So as of right now, Actions lacking warrant or probable cause can be legally challenged. This is an area we are keeping our eyes on. Do we have all of the answers to how this is going to change? No, this is a moving target right now. So we're all keeping our eyes close on this. But as of now, schools are considered a sensitive location, meaning that we are not required to hand over identifying information, locating information for students and families in our care. And the last piece of legislation that we'll look at, or the last piece of protected, is the FERPA. So FERPA states that when students enroll, that information is considered highly sensitive, it's considered private. We don't share that out. And as educational staff, we know this already, right? There are some very limited exceptions to this. One of those being health emergency, if there's a valid subpoena or court orders, but we know that in the case of a typical immigration visit, that typically does not meet this kind of criteria. So we are in a position that we are not sharing that information outwardly with anyone who comes into the school to ask about it. So here are those three principles that we'll be holding tight to as we move through and as we move through the coming year. Ensuring the children's right to education regardless of status, guarding against unreasonable searches and seizures, and controlling who can see important information. I'll also make a quick note here on the pace. When there's a sense of urgency, absolutely, but we can also see with the sheer number of what is being proposed by the incoming team, it's absolutely impossible to move at the kind of pace that they are suggesting. Does it mean we shouldn't be on our toes? Absolutely not. But when we talk about sort of helping to minimize some of the fear and anxiety around that, the pace at which that is being proposed is impossible based on the financial pieces, humans in place to operate those procedures, transportation available to move folks from country to country. We'll pause here before I move into Jordan's piece. This is coming from a very generously vulnerable parent in Colorado schools. What I want you to know is that I want you to put yourself in our shoes. In any emergency or bad situation, don't leave our only children for anything. You are like a second family. They feel safe and in their own home. I think most of us in the school setting feel this way already, that we feel like the children in our care are family in some ways. And the parents are entrusting their children with us as well. With that, we're going to turn it over to Jordan. These are some of the key pieces if we're helping families understand their rights. These are some of the most important pieces that we'll have. A lot of these resources are also available in the website for this session. Jordan, I'll go ahead and turn that over to you.
Great, thank you. I'm going to be fairly brief, but I do want to just emphasize that we are stronger together, and we have a responsibility to take care of each other and to take care of ourselves in this process. So I want to share a little bit of information about Louise kind of covered what's called the Morton memo with the sensitive locations. Tanya knows all about this also, but the sensitive locations are considered churches, healthcare facilities, schools, events like quinceañeras or strawberry days or something like that, and protests. So that is a memo. It's not necessarily what the Trump administration will continue to uphold, but that doesn't mean that the Fourth Amendment goes away. So the Fourth Amendment goes away. The Fourth Amendment protects us on a lot of spaces, and that includes any space that is not open to the public. So many of our schools are not open to the public, and so they should be protected from ICE unless they have a judicial warrant. So one of the things that I would really like to see happen is for our front desk staff to get the training that they need in order to be able to adequately refuse access to students by ICE. Because a lot of times people see a badge or they see someone who's involved in law enforcement and they think, oh, I have to do whatever this person says. And that is not true. So I'm just going to go over this really quickly. There's kind of warrants 101. So number one is to ask, do you have a warrant signed by a judge? If they reply yes, you can say, can you please pass it under the door or show it to me through the window? And the second step is possibly the most important step. It is identifying the difference between a valid warrant and an invalid warrant. So know the difference between these two warrants. A non-valid warrant is signed by an ICE agent, not by a judge or a magistrate. It says underneath their name, authorized immigration officer, beneath the signature line, whereas on a valid warrant, it says signed by U.S. magistrate, judge, or judge under the signature line. So this is very, very important. They purposefully made the ICE warrant look a lot like a valid signed by a judge warrant. That was entirely intentional on their part. So if it is valid, number one, you want to check that the name on the warrant is correct. So let's say a front desk staff says, okay, this is a valid warrant, but you have the name of the student spelled incorrectly. You do not have to let them have access to that student. If valid, the person named on the warrant should leave the house, and it says house here, but should leave the building and speak with to speak with ICE, because other people in the home should stay inside and stay safe. We do have record of ICE picking up others as what they call kind of collateral arrests. So there's that. So if ICE enters your home, remember that you have the right to remain silent. Make sure that others, especially children, know that they have to keep quiet. And if ICE detains you, you have the right to remain silent. You have the right to refuse to sign anything. You have the right to a lawyer, and you have the right to make a phone call. And you can ask for a bond hearing. So those are all really important things for our families to know about. This poster is available. I believe Louise is going to make it available on that website. We want to make it available so that everyone can have it. But if you witness a raid or any kind of ICE activity, what we have listed on here is our Colorado Rapid Response Network hotline. That hotline during the first set of Trump years was very active with many volunteers who could come and support people. Since the Biden administration, the temperature kind of got turned down a little bit. And so the most active members of that hotline now have been our dispatchers. And our dispatchers are incredible people who volunteer their time every other week for 12-hour shifts to answer questions, to tell people what their rights are, to help people get to a resource that they might need. So this hotline is staffed by volunteers. If you would like to volunteer and you are bilingual, I would very much like to speak with you. Tanya is actually one of our volunteer dispatchers. But there is a work in progress happening right now to kind of reestablish that hotline as to have more volunteers who are able to respond as first responders to show up to the site of a ICE enforcement action. So that is in the process right now. I have this particular poster in English and in Spanish, and we are actually looking at trying to get it into some other languages. I would love to have some recommendations on which languages to prioritize. But I now was actually just thinking I could answer some questions if anyone had questions that they wanted to ask. Is that possible, Louise, for people to unmute themselves? I'm not sure.
That's fantastic.
Great. I do see that Francesca has a raised hand. If you can unmute yourself, I'm happy to answer a question. I'm also happy to look at the Q&A if that's easier.
Oh, there we go. It keeps popping up and down and I can't quite grab it. If you can enter that into the chat, Francisca, in case I can't get in there into the Q&A.
Okay, we get into the Q&A. Chat is disabled. Will it be recorded? I see lots of questions about logistical questions. Okay. Well, then maybe. Oh, what's that?
For some reason, I'm just not seeming to be able to unmute. There we go. If you'd like to raise your hand to be able to ask questions. It looks like the hands that were raised are down.
Great.
Yeah.
I know that some people might still have questions, so if they're percolating in your brain, that's great. I would say that the schools that we are most concerned about ICE being interested in students are schools that have students that are over 18 and schools that have students that may or may not have a criminal record. So more of the alternative schools and more of the high schools. We would love to know which schools to prioritize getting this training into, but we certainly want to try to provide this training to as many front desk staff as possible. We do have a strong relationship with members of Congress who said that they'd like to try and help and things like that, but really getting in there would be the best. Oh, Kira, would you like to?
Kira is ready to go.
Yeah, would you like to ask a question?
Yes. Thank you, Jordan. Thinking about step 3 on your image here, this question came up recently in a conversation with principals, and they were wondering, some elementary principals in particular, but any age, if ICE agents come with a valid warrant to any school, but especially an elementary school, should we release a child to ICE without their parents?
Great question.
That is
So ICE is number one, I would say this is very, very unlikely to happen. Because ICE has to have a whole situation in order to take custody of a minor. And I want to say it's very, very unlikely to happen. And one of the reasons is a lot of paperwork on their part. And ICE agents don't like homework any more than your students do. So that's the one thing I have to say about that. If that does happen for some reason, absolutely not. You do not have to release them to a ICE agent without having their parent present. Their parents should be present. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And Kate asks, do all immigrants have a right to a lawyer before speaking with ICE? No, that's not true. You are not protected in the same way that a US citizen is. An immigrant does not have, oh, Tani would like to answer this question. But that is my understanding, is that immigrants are not entitled to legal representation. We are trying to change that in the state of Colorado by making sure that we can get legal representation for as many people who want it. But Tanya, do you want to say more about that?
Sure. I was just managing the buttons, so I put that you were answering live. But yes, even though immigrants do not have a right to a lawyer for immigration proceedings, they can still verbally say, I do not wish to say anything until I talk to my attorney. And that is actually a very important phrase for people to state explicitly, because it acknowledges that they know their rights and that they know they have a right to remain silent, and that they can then proceed to find an immigration attorney, even though one will not be appointed to them.
Awesome, amazing. And I just answered another question, but I'll do it live also. Sarah asked, does the warrant have to include both last names or just one of the two? I'm sorry, and I answered both first and last names must be on the warrant. Because I am in a position to say I don't want ICE to take people away, I would say that the name has to be as complete. So it has to have 2 last names if the person has 2 last names. I'm going to think of any reason I can think of to keep ICE from taking anyone away. So I'm going to say if this warrant is for Thomas Aguilar Garcia and they only put Thomas Garcia, you cannot have this person. That's what I would say. This is a similar training that we're trying to also get into the hands of people who are restaurant staff also, because if the public does not have access to the kitchen, then ICE does not have access to the kitchen either. Okay. And I think I'm all set. I don't know how to I don't know how to give you all my email address, but I'm going to just give you my email address in an answer for Kira. Cool. Thank you so much for having me, Louise. I'm sorry I must depart.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Jordan. We'll continue just moving a little bit on to what Tanya is mentioning here, just some, and let's go back one more time if you need to reach Jordan, and we'll make sure to share email information as well. When we're talking about those important know your rights pieces, that you do have the right to remain silent, right to refuse a warrantless search. You do not have to sign anything you don't understand. You have the right to request a copy of your immigration papers. You do have the right to counsel, hearing by a judge in most cases, and protection against discrimination. Tanya, are there pieces that you would add in here as well?
Honestly, I think the most important thing is for the community to have very key phrases memorized. So being able to say, I have a right to remain silent and just not say anything after that. Being able to say, I refuse for you to search me, or I do not consent to a search. Like having those key phrases is going to be really, really, really critical.
I appreciate that. And then, of course, just as a general reminder for folks, we want to avoid any contact that's unnecessary with law enforcement. We do not want to carry false documents or give false information to authorities. If they ask, you can say, I choose not to talk, or you can present them with the appropriate documents. And I would just, an added note, be aware of where you are. We recognize that especially in states with very, very different outlooks on how this can and will play out. If you do not need to find yourself in a jurisdiction that is less immigrant friendly or has a pledge to assist with any sort of removal proceedings, then I would honestly suggest not being there if you don't need to be. So just general ideas and thoughts for keeping ourselves safe. Another piece of insight that we would want to have on our radar is that families may find it in their best interest to create some sort of plan, a game plan for if anything should happen. Identifying organizations that can be of help, identifying at least 2 willing caregivers, in some cases creating a living will, a power of attorney, those pieces. All of this again is on the website. I just saw someone say that the QR code is not linked out. I'm going to drop that into the Q&A as well. With that, let's go ahead and turn it over and get some more information from Tanya.
Beautiful. And in regards to that emergency plan, I think it relates to Barbara's question in the Q&A around if a parent is rounded up in a raid, what will happen to children who are in daycare or school? So ideally in those situations, the families would have completed an emergency plan and you would have access to the emergency contacts. That would be the next people in line for you to call to pick up the child. Beautiful. So just a little bit of information about me. I am myself an undocumented immigrant. I do have the temporary protection of DACA. I was born in Chihuahua, Mexico, and I did live most of my life in Maricopa County in Phoenix, Arizona, under a really, really anti-immigrant sheriff. So I have very key expertise to share both as a person with lived experience and as an educator. I was once a middle school teacher and a college advisor. So if you go to the next slide, or do I know how to go to the next slide?
I can also push that through also. I'm just reading through some of these Q&A. Fantastic.
Beautiful, thank you. So quick information about the undocumented experience. We fear and distrust authority figures, and this does include school staff and teachers. And that means that self-disclosure poses a threat to my perceived safety, right? And so that means that a lot of your students, a lot of your families will choose not to tell you if they are out of status because they think you as an authority figure might be threatening. A very important part to this is so many resources, so many opportunities, so many things are denied to undocumented people. So we also are very aware that we're going to receive about 99 no's to any one given yes. And that does mean that the most important thing you can teach your students is self-advocacy, is the ability to name their needs, ask for their needs, and consult trusted adults about their needs. Because the only way that I've been able to go through life as an undocumented person is by reaching lots of humans, asking lots of questions, and getting to that 100th person who says yes. Very important notes here around anti-immigrant rhetoric, especially during a presidential transition. Anti-immigrant rhetoric is really, really high, and it does fuel an internal fight or flight response, and it also maintains it on an ongoing basis. So that means that your undocumented community is going to constantly be in that stage of not knowing whether we need to fight or we need to, run away or whatever it is going to be. And so creating spaces of belonging is so important, right? Trying to establish safety in your classrooms. Are you welcoming them? Are you inviting in? Are you telling them that you know and understand their experiences, that you accept them, right? All of those keywords in this little circle, super critical. And I did want to make a note on that for a lot of your undocumented community, planning for the future is really hard. Even for myself, as someone who has DACA, I can only really plan my life in 2-year increments. And even then, it's entirely possible that anything can change at any moment. And so for your students, asking them to think about what happens after high school might feel like a nearly impossible task because it's hard to know what will happen tomorrow. Can you go to the next slide?
Maybe if it wants to cooperate with me today.
So a quick note on my own personal journey, I found that my version of self-advocacy included civic engagement. And civic engagement for me was a means of control within a system that I cannot control. So I do encourage you all to help your students figure out what their version of self-advocacy means. And it might be as straightforward as helping them verbally express what they need, what resources they need to access, what languages they need it in, and if they don't understand something, what would help them understand it. And for others, it might be something like myself, where I did need that civic engagement to feel a semblance of control. Next slide. One important thing about working with young people. In the middle of all of this anti-immigrant rhetoric that is fueling bullying and all sorts of mental health challenges, you should also be aware that it can be fueling self-hate, literally like I experienced growing up in Phoenix, Arizona. I hated being Mexican. I hated being an immigrant. And so talking to your youth, and this I think can be, broadly for any of your youth, about how they can find the way to identify their experiences as powerful, as strengths-based. So instead of talking about your students as having language difficulties, giving them that props for being bilingual, instead of, highlighting all these mental health challenges, instead consider calling them resilient or strong. instead of thinking through, the myriad of adult level responsibilities that a lot of us immigrants have to do, like translation and interpretation. The word there is independent. Instead of the financial instability, maybe we're creative. Instead of employment concerns, we can be our own self-advocates. And that strengths-based language in your schools will also then impact how your students view themselves and how others view them, thus reducing some of the bullying, hopefully, that is happening in the schools. Next slide. So, how then do you build trust and rapport with youth and families that distrust authority figures and educators and teachers, etc.? A lot of this is frequent and honest communication channels, making sure that you don't lie or spread misinformation. And if you don't know something, just saying, well, I don't know, but you're being honest, right? The frequent part is also important because families right now feel like everything is changing rapidly. And so even if there are no new updates next week, maybe saying, hey, there are no new updates, but I hear your concern. Small group one-on-one family meetings. A lot of families right now are very concerned about their information being shared and what the implications are if there's a confidentiality breach. And so maintaining some small group conversations, one-on-one conversations where you can really remind the students and families that the information is being kept confidential and that you are getting to know them on a very individual level. And of course, more broadly, inviting input from all the cultural and language liaisons that you can access. So on the right, you sort of see lots of examples. This can look like hosting informal coffee hours, open door policies, showing interest in their traditions. I think schools do a really good job of weaving in different traditions throughout the school year in like family nights or special holidays. Inviting cultural mediators if there's maybe like a language gap or something that you don't quite understand. And really inviting community members to share about themselves so that you don't have that wide opening of making assumptions. Assumptions are not great for this, especially because misinformation spreads widely. And so allowing people to share from their own perspective what they're experiencing. And then listening, I wanted to highlight, is the best form of showing love to another human. Like, this is scientifically proven. When you listen to someone attentively, you are not focusing on how you're going to respond. You're just creating the container for folks to share. That part is so, so critical for your students and families to feel like they're creating that space of belonging and they're creating a trusted relationship with you. Next slide. Also, your words matter so much. The first bullet point is the most straightforward and somehow tends to be the hardest. Language equity. Yes, please try to translate as many things as possible. Please try to have interpreters present at parent communication moments. And no, your bilingual staff are not interpreters. Language interpretation is a professional skill, so you need to bring people in for that. Please drop the I word. We are not illegal aliens. And in fact, that is widely viewed as a derogatory term. So instead, consider talking about our families as undocumented, unauthorized, out of status. And as you do that, really remember what Louise said at the beginning, that all of us, we come in varying shapes and sizes, right? And so not all immigrants are undocumented, and not all immigrants are going to have the same experience. And this already doesn't take into account the experience of refugees. That's also a very different experience. And so really being mindful of how you're labeling different things. For the third bullet point, really explicitly say undocumented. And this is a best practice, but I do want to remind y'all that depending on the school district that you live in or the school that you're at, you might want to really know where that line is of how much you can explicitly say. But a best practice, regardless, is to really highlight that there are undocumented students in the community. So you can say to a wide group of your students or families, some people here are having challenges that might be threatening their sense of safety or their ability to learn. And I see that. I understand that that is a concern. Even when you're offering resources, when you say this resource is open and available to everyone, I, as an undocumented person, immediately check out because I know that 99% of the time you don't mean me. It's not about me. Nothing ever is about me. And therefore, I really need y'all to say this resource is open and available to all, regardless of your immigration status, regardless of your citizenship. Or I looked into the eligibility requirements and it doesn't explicitly say. So I just commit to looking further into it and getting back to y'all next week. That's also fine, right? But it acknowledges that some people in the room have a different experience. Also, don't underestimate the importance of having visuals. There are so many different things. If you just go online, you can find pro-immigrant visuals in varying shapes and sizes, varying thoughts, and it could even be stickers, right? Stickers that say diverse origins, shared futures. Like that says nothing about immigration status, and yet it might make me feel seen. And ultimately, the highlight here is it's better to say I don't know the answer, but I understand that this is a very important question to you, and maybe I can even help you find some resources. It's better to say all of that than to say nothing, because saying nothing and doing nothing keeps me or keeps your student, your family members separate, feeling alienated, feeling secluded, feeling outside, and you're trying to bring people in. Next slide, please. So on information, we're going to see things moving very quickly next year in terms of the media because the news cycle is just always on. And so it is so, so important for y'all to fight misinformation. And the best way to do that is to not share anything that you don't know to be true. So stick to factual, rights-based messaging, really highlighting the constitutional rights. And if there are new policies that are maybe making their way through Congress, or the bill has barely been submitted or something, but it's not fully happened yet, think through what is your central school district putting out? What information are they sharing? That is maybe just summarizing what's happening, where people can find reliable information, and then giving your staff the access to the language to be able to share with students and families like, this is in process. We don't know what it'll turn out to be. We don't know what will happen with this. We are monitoring it. That in and of itself is already helping me see that it's on your radar. Sometimes it's just as important to let people know that things are on your radar, even if you don't know the final answer. And so reminding your community that they still have rights, again, sticking to that factual rights-based messaging. And of course, right now, families might be exhibiting some signs of panic, and we want to decrease that. So really consider how you're showing up, right? Are you calm? Do you feel reassured? Do you feel like, we're going to monitor this. We have a plan. We know who to talk to. We're going to offer you periodic updates. That is very reassuring and limits that panic response. Next slide. So a big thing that you will want to know in order to be able to show up as a reassured individual is who's in the community. So often the most common questions I get as someone that works with young people and used to be an educator and I'm undocumented myself are in these 4 buckets. I get asked about local service providers, and my immediate answer is always, have you looked on the UndocuHub website? Yes, we have a website called UndocuHub where you can search through different categories of service providers that have been vetted to work with undocumented populations. And next year and years forthcoming, there might be a lot of questions about policy changes. For this, again, please check your sources. I truly trust the Colorado Immigrant Rights Coalition and the National Immigration Law Center to provide factual updates about policy. If you have questions about what to do in case of an immigration enforcement activity, that's where I would turn to American Friends Service Committee, you just heard from Jordan earlier, or Remain, the Rocky Mountain Immigration Advocacy Network. They are great resources that can also point you in the direction of other free legal clinics and things like that. And then, of course, there's not enough of us working with young immigrants. At Convivir Colorado, we do work directly with young immigrants. And so you are free to refer your students and families to me. We do out-of-school programming to really work on that mental health of our undocumented population. But in the ecosystem is also Movimiento Poder. They work with young people who are impacted by migration. And I believe Inspire does as well. And if none of these are close to where you are, you can consider looking for student groups on college campuses, because building that peer-to-peer connection and support is going to result to be a really important thing. And I will say, just, wherever you are in your local community, just look for your local immigrant advocacy centers, your local legal clinics, what local faith-based organizations, maybe you have cultural centers. And of course, you might want to keep track of who in your local community might offer some basic needs support in case of a person who's the primary breadwinner being deported in a family, and any mental health resources that are available for your local community. So those are lots of things to keep track of, but I also think that schools already have some of this information on hand. It's just a matter of flipping the switch to think about these in terms of who can I then refer my immigrant families to, like which of the resources I already know of do I know have multiple languages on staff, because that would be really helpful. And that might be my last slide.
Thank you so much for that. Let's pause here and see if we have questions that you might be able to answer as well. And while we're waiting for a few folks to chime in or raise their hand, just a reminder that the Colorado Immigrant Rights Coalition does have a Know Your Rights webinar for immigrants immediately following this from 6 to 7:30 p.m. So please, if you have the capacity tonight, hop on over. If you have folks that really would benefit from that in your community, send them over that way as well. If anyone would like to raise their hand with specific questions.
I see Kat has a question about orgs that can help families with emergency plans, especially since there may be questions around power of attorneys. Yes, so right now, the Colorado Immigrant Rights Coalition is collaborating with Remain and AFSC and a few other organizations to really consolidate all of this information. And they are trying to figure out if they have the capacity to start creating some of these workshops, but power of attorneys in particular, it makes more sense to have legal guidance. And so if you do have a family that is interested in making a power of attorney, it's really better for you to refer them to free legal clinics so that they can talk to an attorney. But in terms of filling out an emergency plan, there will certainly be workshops starting in January.
Fantastic. And we have Jennifer and Barbara. They both have their hands raised. Barbara, do you want to go ahead?
Thank you. She answered my question, and I didn't see if I had to raise my hand or it was about what happens if you have children whose parents have been caught up in a raid. Because I'm afraid we're going to see a lot more of that this time. And she answered it, so thank you.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and I will say one thing schools can do to be proactive, don't go around asking your families, like, do you have an emergency plan? Because that might be a little bit stressful. Instead, maybe you can just go through your list of students and families and just confirm, does everyone in there have an emergency contact listed? Because that might be a really good place to begin.
I feel like that's an actionable step that we can do just to help families feel a little bit more prepared. Thank you so
I think
much.
there was another hand. No?
Yes.
No, I don't see hands anymore. Okay, beautiful. Well, if there are other questions, I can certainly keep track of the Q&A.
Oh, we've got one more. Steph, if you want to go ahead and step in.
We just wondered where the recording will be posted.
We will share that outwardly with attendees, and we'll also link it in the website, which now should be fine and well and live. So I'll share the link and QR code to that one more time.
Okay.
We'll share it there as well. Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. We'll go ahead and continue into our final sections here. It did not just send me all the way back to the beginning. It sure did. Hang in there with me for a minute, folks. Canva sometimes just decides to go where it wants to.
It really likes you. Yeah, it wants to
It
go to the
really does.
beginning.
My name is Louise Lillier with Diversified Consulting. If you need to reach out directly, if you have emails, questions after this webinar is closed, go ahead and you can email me at Diversified or Lauren at Diversified, and we'll make sure to get the right tools and resources out to you. In the final moments here, we'll just touch on some trauma-informed pieces or trauma-sensitive pieces. Again, if you would like to access that pop-up website, it's here. It should be live. If there's anyone that can give us like a yes that they got in, that would be hugely helpful. I'll pause here for just a moment for folks to be able to access that if needed. And a lot of the tools and resources we've discussed today, including the link to the red card. And a red card is just a little tiny business card size piece of paper that folks can put in their pockets in English and whatever other language you order. It's in a lot of different languages that just lays out those rights. Essentially they can hand it to the officer and it tells them I am choosing to remain silent, all of those pieces. For nonprofits, those are free. If you are a business, as we are, we order them anyway, and it's still a very cost-effective way of being able to share that and communicate that information out. So all of that information is in the website. And then we'll just move in to looking at a few ways we can communicate with our families in ways that, as Tanya was mentioning, help sort of diminish those high stress levels. We know they're going to be there, but if what we can do to sort of bring that level down and have some practical strategies for moving forward. The first thing that we can do, and Tanya also touched on this as well, is creating safe spaces. So a sanctuary space in your school where individuals can come judgment-free and have access to safety and security and belonging, first of all, resources, mental health supports, and just by and large, throughout the school building, throughout your classroom, making sure that we're really focusing on routine and predictability. Routine and predictability create a sense of structure. That structure lends itself to being able to trust and being able to be present. We know that students are not able to really engage fully cognitively in learning if we're up here. So creating that system of structure and routine and predictability is one of the first ways that we can help create a trauma-informed setting. When we're talking about immigration pieces in particular, making sure that we're either doing one of two things. We're addressing things very broadly as a school, as a class, that making very broad overarching statements, or that we're talking to students one-on-one and ideally in a space where they're able to come to us, not us pushing into them. So what we don't want to do, of course, is just be calling individual students out or small groups of students out in the larger whole. So we're looking very broadly, or we're pulling in, but trying to stay out of the in-between. Using that calm, even tone, checking our body language. If we are sitting with our crossed arms, those, sort of tense structures, that can signal a message that we're not really listening or hearing, or that we're turned off, or that we have different ideas around welcoming or what their experience is. So soft eye contact, leaning in to listen. If it's appropriate, placing a hand maybe on another's hand if they're really in a moment of distress, depending on what your context is. If you're wherever you are. Explaining a situation simply and then asking, would you like to repeat that back to me so I can clearly understand what you said? We know that when we are in a state of fight, flight, when that amygdala and hippocampus, everything's fired up, our frontal lobe executive functioning pieces are not moving at their greatest potential. So repeating things back can help make sure that that information is getting in. When I am panicked, what comes in one ear goes straight out the other. So helping to settle in, repeat the information, and just bring a sense of calm. Again, as everyone on this panel has said, you do not need to have all the answers. You will not have all the answers. I've been in this work for 20 years, and I feel like every day right now is such a steep learning curve of new policy and new messaging and new pieces coming at us from all directions. So we are all learning and growing through this together. I don't know everything, but I'm here to help find reliable information, modeling that sense of calm, humility, and helping to not fuel additional pieces of stress and anxiety. We can also work toward neutral, non-sensational language. So these are things we likely do anyway, just as a reminder. So we are working to acknowledge the worry, acknowledge the feeling, and state that we may or may not have answers for you, but we will help find the answers that you need, or we can help direct you to the answers you need. Again, I will say here, be mindful of the line in your district or your jurisdiction, and that may mean I can direct you to someone else in the school who can help you find the answers that you need. It's okay to talk about these feelings. We're here to support you. This may be a good opportunity to be really in close collaboration with your school counselors and mental health professionals on site. Instead of stating the facts and just moving on, again, making sure, is this information clear? Is there anything you'd like me to say in a different way? Do you have additional questions? To let that sort of simmer and let students be able to continue that conversation in a way that feels safe and meaningful for them, to have some closure around a specific idea. When we talk about signs of distress, a lot of times, right, this is what we'll see, that sometimes the disengagement, the pulling back, the retreating in our older students. But transition shock, which is what I really lean into when I'm talking about trauma, because we think of that as an overarching umbrella that covers, encompasses things like post-traumatic stress on the far end, high anxiety, persistent day-to-day anxiety, but it also makes space for culture shock. And so for a lot of our students coming from diverse backgrounds, it's really helpful to be able to bring that into the fold as well. So in this case, transition shock really can have a lot of different sort of outward looking pieces that might manifest as things like nausea, or someone that's coming in from the playground or lunchroom or music room every day. Oh, Miss Lily, my elbow hurts. I have a rash. I have something like this is happening. My so-and-so is hurting. I need to go see the nurse. Having that sort of consistent physical manifestation of those. Excessive tidiness, excessive disorganization, emotional shutdown or survivor's guilt, which we may see come out as things like anxiety, anger, weepiness, social pieces, repetitive play, self-talk. What I will say here is that every one of us exhibits pieces on this map, right? My own children exhibit pieces of this on the map. It's when we see that there are a drastic change in what students have presented with leading up to this time, and now we're seeing a lot of these pieces sort of come together at once. When I'm seeing the same 3 or 4 or 5 pieces from this map showing up repeatedly every day, we're becoming more disruptive, we're becoming more defiant, we're becoming, the attendance is all of a sudden getting wonky, we're more disengaged, we suddenly have speech impediments, we're suddenly toe walking, we're having some challenges with categorizing and planning and managing our time. If I'm seeing a lot of things pop up, or some 5 or 6 that are persistent every day, that's when I'm starting to take some notes and make sure that I have other folks alongside me on my team that are experienced in the school setting to help me evaluate and determine whether or not this youth could have some extra support. But whether or not we've identified youth in our care, we can always create spaces that are trauma responsive and safe for all. So one piece that I would say is that if the cultural influence does impact how trauma shows up in a space, and that every culture and every family within a culture is going to present that in a different way. So what we may think of as a westward leaning, how things will come up, might not be what is reflected for family. And the ways that we approach mental health is going to vary greatly, whether that's, say, from a collectivist lens, maybe doing one-on-one sort of counseling sessions may not be as impactful as doing some whole group or having some time to talk together in community. What we look for in our trauma-informed moves, what I found most successful, especially in working in classrooms with dynamic learners and more specifically multilingual learners, is looking at hyperarousal or hypoarousal. And what I mean by that is when we're in hyperarousal, everything's fired up. We are just, the amygdala is going, the hippocampus is going, our heart rate is going, our breathing might be quick and shallow. We're might be clammy, we might be warm, we might get really cold. But having those symptoms or manifestations of the racing heart and moving quickly. Hypoarousal is when we lean more into withdrawal. We can feel sort of down, depressed. Here's where we might really start to feel cold. We might get stomach aches. We might lean into wanting different substances to sort of calm that. So what we try to do is when students are already up, we don't want to add more upregulating techniques. Upregulating meaning we're like boosting the energy, getting more things out. That sometimes can create more up, which is not what we want. So if we're in hyper arousal, we're already fired up, things that ground us, things that bring us more into a state of balance. So we think about that window of tolerance being a state of balance. It brings us more into a zone where if we're red, we're up here, we can't have a healthy conversation to move forward, into the green zone where we can start to be able to have some constructive conversation. So again, if we're really high up, we want to be able to have some things that can bring us back down into a state of tolerance. If we're in hypoarousal and we're already feeling low energy, lethargic, cold, craving substances, all of those pieces, then we would, something that will bring us up, that will be upregulating, may be more beneficial. What I love for all students is to be able to introduce some vagus nerve stimulating techniques. And what I love about this is, first of all, there's a low language load. So it creates a sense of equity where anyone is able to participate in those. And two, that it's one thing about the vagus nerve stimulating techniques is it can kind of meet you where you are. It kind of helps the body sort of achieve that window of tolerance on its own. So it can act as an upregulating or downregulating depending on where you need that to be. The vagus nerve runs all down our body. So vagal stimulating techniques will stimulate that parasympathetic nervous system and tell the hippocampus and the amygdala, it's time to calm down. It's time to take it down a notch. We got this. So one of the things we can do is, for example, holding our head, looking off at the diagonal. And if we hold that for a moment, very often we'll kick off a yawn, which is exactly what it's supposed to do. And we can switch and do that to the other side. I love, probably my favorite one are butterfly taps, and it's just hitting right below the collarbone. And you can do it this way. With younger students, I tend to do the butterflies. If I do it, often students will just do it along with me anyway. So we're tapping that, feeling that sense of calm. I do this before public speaking or flying or anything that I start to feel in a state of hyper arousal. Gargling, eating foods, to getting out and taking a drink of water, laughter, all of these things can help stimulate the vagus nerve, pulling and tugging at the ears. So any of those things that students can do that don't necessarily, people don't really have to know what's going on. If you're sitting there tugging your ear, people aren't realizing that you're working on a trauma-informed response. We know that self-regulating techniques are not going to be a cure-all. This is something that is bigger than any technique that is going to happen. But if we can help students have some things they can do to manage that in the moment, and that even families can do together. What we do want to happen is that if we are in a state of urgency, if we are meeting someone at the door, if there is something that's going on, we do want students and their families to be able to have some techniques they can hold on to, that they can carry with them, that are easy, take along, don't need anything else, to be able to help bring them down into that window of tolerance a little bit more. Not self-regulation again. We do have lots of exercises and activities for this on our blog space on our website, or you can find those all over in our materials. So if you have extra questions or would like to walk through some extra pieces, we can certainly take the time to do that as well. And in just being mindful of everyone's time today, and beginning to close out, again, taking a moment to sit with a parent in our Colorado community. And again, I thank you for that vulnerability and showing up and being in this space. What does it mean? What does it mean if the school is taking this seriously? What does it mean if families are feeling heard and seen and valued? Knowing that the school is preparing to help and support us, it means a lot to me, and lets me know that the work they're doing is something they care about, that it's not just something that we are saying loosely, that we're meaning this. We're loving schools, loving students and the community. When you take these actions, big or small, families know, families see this together. Let's take one more quick pause for Q&A. Here are, yay, we have some connects on here. Thanks for adding this in, Tanya, I appreciate it. For contact information, if you would like to reach them directly, if you'd like to see some of their information also in the pop-up website, or be able to visit them or bring them into your campus, here's the information for everyone involved. The one final pause here for some Q&A or additional thoughts or comments before we close out tonight. Tanya, if you don't mind helping me just manage, oh, did I just stop that share? I sure did. To just make sure if there's anyone else in here with us with a raised hand.
Let's see. I do see that there is one pending question in the Q&A.
Okay.
From Denise. I work at 3 high schools running a workshop after school. They're minors, front doors are unlocked. I'm assuming my workshop is a private space and I could use that language. What exactly would that sound like? So, and you can jump in, Louise, but my recommendation there would be, if you are the adult in a room and you see that ICE is, I don't know, somehow made it into your space, you can immediately say, hello, you should not be here. Maybe consider, closing the door behind you and walking out into the hallway to ask them some of the questions that Jordan mentioned earlier, like, is there a warrant? Do you have so-and-so things that are official? And if they don't, then kindly escort them out of the building and tell them this is a school ground. We're, running activities with minors. I do not consent to a search. Having those key phrases there is important.
Thank you.
There's a hand raised by Pablo.
Pablo, you have the floor. Go ahead.
And another question came into the Q&A. I am a school counselor helping students on their financial aid applications, and Ken came out with a statement urging families to be careful in filling out these applications because we cannot guarantee their info won't be shared. Do you know if there are other resources, i.e. financial, for undocumented students or students with mixed status families who would like to go to college but don't feel safe filling out financial ID applications? This is where I would encourage you to really dive into school-specific aid. So maybe if they're really concerned about filling out state aid and financial aid and in-state applications, all of those, you can still find scholarships from these specific institutions. So a lot of schools in Colorado will have their own private money that they can allocate in different ways, and those will have their own applications in their own institution. And from personal experience, I would say that the schools that are most friendly towards providing support to undocumented students tend to be MSU Denver and Colorado State University in Fort Collins.
I was just going to mention MSU. I'm so glad you did, because they actually have a whole, like, an immigrant hub that's just for undocumented. And that actually is one of the resources we have in that website. There is an entire page that's just documented, or just set out for undocumented folks who are hoping to attend higher education, with lots of tools and resources. So that page would be a great starting point.
And I was going to say they're very responsive to questions and in providing one-on-one support. So even if your student doesn't end up going to MSU, you can actually still reach out to the Immigrant Services Program at MSU and ask them for some one-on-one guidance.
Fantastic. And in being mindful of everyone's time here, the complexities and uncertainties around potential mass deportations challenge our schools and communities in real human ways. We have guiding principles that do not change: the laws that safeguard students' access to education, the rights that protect individuals from unreasonable harm, and the compassion that drives our commitment to care.
So if it's
Thank you all so much for being here tonight. This is recorded, so we will share that on the website. Again, that session with CERC starts in about 10 minutes. So if you have the capacity to be in there for one more session tonight, we'll see you over there. I'll stay on the line for a few more moments in case anyone has any
two different
questions. And thank you all so much for being here tonight.